everybody. My name is Toni and Marcolini. Welcome to the podcast. It may interest you to know. I have a returning guest who I'm very excited to talk to today, best-selling author Robert Dugoni. Welcome. Let me start by saying welcome.
Thank you. Right. Nice to be back.
Um, you know, I read your latest novel, A Killing on the Hill. Uh, it is brilliant. From beginning to end. Well, first, let me say I'm a big fan of the historical fiction genre, and you combined it with the 1930s gangster crime, almost police procedural, courtroom drama. You threw in some romance. I mean, anything you're looking for is in this novel, and I mean, I think it was the first. Let me start here. This was the first historical fiction piece you had done. Am I right?
Yeah. This is. I have another one coming out, a World War II book coming out after this one, but so this was the first one, definitely.
Well, it was clearly very well researched. I felt immersed in the time period, seamlessly immersed, right? There wasn't a sense of, oh, this feels, so disconnected. No, I was immersed right into the world. It does have that very, gumshoe, gangster feel to it through parts. I mean, I just loved it. I thought it was a brilliant combination genre. Like I said, you had a little bit of romance, but I mean, it was police procedural. It was historical fiction. It just wow. I applaud you.
Thank you very much. Very kind of you.
So I understand it was based upon a true story.
It was, yes, yes.
Okay, so tell me, can you tell me the true story?
Yeah, so I was up in the attic cleaning out, and I found these, large books that you would traditionally put either old photographs in and I opened them up and they were newspaper articles. They were newspaper articles from the 1930s. And they were my wife's grandfather's. He was a lawyer, and he was a lawyer in the 30s, 40s, and 50s. And he did a lot of everything, which a lot of lawyers did that back then. They draft a will and they defend you if you killed somebody. They did all, and so he was one of those kinds of lawyers. He was very prominent, but at the time, 1933, he was very young. He was in his early 30s. And I'm looking through these scrapbooks, and there's stories about a doctor who's being tried for a procedure on a woman. They don't say what it is, but it's very clearly an abortion. And I'm thinking, well, that's interesting. And I keep flipping, and all of a sudden I come to this magazine article in there, and it's on this trial of a guy by the name of George Moore. And he owned a nightclub in Seattle in 1933. And I'm like, wait a minute, 1933, that's the Great Depression, that's Prohibition. How did he do this? And he ends up shooting a light heavyweight boxer named Frankie Ray in his club. And there's all kinds of speculation as to why he did it. Some people said he did it because Frankie's girlfriend owed a hospital bill, and George Moore promised to pay it because she was a prostitute, and he didn't pay it. Some people thought it was because he was trying to pay his new Cadillac that he bought. And some people thought it was because Moore was trying to get rid of Frankie Ray because he was in love with Frankie Ray's girlfriend.
Mm.
So there was all this speculation. And, her grandfather had, from the very first day of trial to the very day that, the sentencing took place, he had all these articles. And I mean, just dozens and dozens and dozens from all the different newspapers there. So I was going to tell the story from the defense attorney's point of view. And then all of a sudden I got this idea, and it just sort of, William Schumacher just sort of worked his way into my psyche. And he was just saying, let me tell the story. I can tell it from a broader perspective than a defense lawyer. Let me tell it how it happened.
Well, let me say for those of you who haven't read the book, because it's coming out now, um, he said William Schumacher, but nicknamed, I guess you'd say, Shu,
Sure.
in the book. is a reporter, a very young reporter who comes to town and gets involved in covering this crime, exactly as you described. You know, the boxer gets killed by the owner of the Pom Pom Club, um and he's going along with the police almost, you know, investigating and covering it. It's his first big story. It's his chance to make his name. And I just loved this character, right? Because he brought all the exuberance of youth, you know, that you're involved, you want to make it big, you know, when you still have that idealism that lies ahead, you know, that makes you're passionate, you're young, as when at beginning any career,
Yeah.
and he brings that to it. Um, and that yet that you may disagree with me, but that naivete,
Oh
you know,
yeah.
that also comes with the not being seasoned yet and not really reading people the way he should and understanding. He really gets himself embroiled in a mess.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's how it was done back then. You did have to get a press pass, and you didn't, and the chief of police issued your press pass, and you were embedded basically with the police and the prosecutor's office when there was a crime. And if you didn't play nice, you were out. And so there was a tremendous amount of corruption in Seattle back in the 1930s. That corruption went all the way actually up into the 1960s, including the police force, which I'm a big fan of, honestly, of the Seattle Police Force. I do a police procedural series, but there was a lot of corruption, and
Well,
um,
that's it's interesting because you even say at one point, why do you think Capone never comes here? Like,
yeah, yeah,
right.
and that's a true story. Capone didn't come because he didn't think there was any money. And there's just not that far. So they weren't mob, they weren't mafia, they were gangsters. And I was told by somebody from that time period there was a difference. The gangsters were sort of the guys that sort of were on their kind of out there on their own, and more. I mean, it's amazing that this guy would become the owner of the largest dinner club, entertainment club in Seattle at the time, because if you go back and look at his criminal record, the guy was a loser. I mean, he was a vagrant. He was getting pinched for petty crimes and just vagrancy, and how he made it to that position, that I don't know. But it was, and the thing what they did with the articles back then was they would print the testimony taking place during the trial. And of course they're not stenographers, right? But they're putting in words like copper, you got me there, copper, and things like that. And it's like those were terms of art back then. It was really fascinating. It was really a fascinating book for me to research. And I got a great deal of help from the Seattle Public Library, who just love to do that kind of stuff for authors. They love it, and they were really,
Sure. I mean, that's what they're there to help research in all capacities. I'm a big fan of libraries in general.
yeah. Yeah, no, it was just really fun. And I got to do the audiobook, and that was just a kick. That was a kick. That was a lot of fun.
I didn't I read it the old school way on my tablet, but that I think that would be interesting. Did you do the voices too? Would you
I
read
did
it?
the, yeah, yeah, I've done a couple of the books now, and I have the same editor, and he's great. He's able to help me with, a woman's voice by just lowering the volume as opposed to trying to speak like a woman, just lowering the volume and changing sort of dialects a little bit and things like that. It was a lot of fun, tremendous amount of fun.
Oh, now I want to check out the audiobook.
It was really, really a great time. Really a lot of fun to do it.
So now you take me back. So you see the story, you say there's something here, and you start writing it. Um, how does it happen? I mean, you're creating this on the fly. Is it all, I mean, do you take the time and if you do, how long to like thoroughly research the world and what it looked like in the 30s? I mean, tell me, how do you begin?
So I began by just reading every newspaper clipping. Just every newspaper clipping, and starting to take notes on the newspaper clippings. What happened when, who testified, who spoke, what day they spoke on. So I'd have sort of a calendar of all the stuff that transpired over period of time. And then, you can't print everything, right? You can't write every character into the book. And, there's a guy there that comes and speaks, Happy Art Trent, and they called him Happy. He was a singer. Well, there was also a really beautiful black woman entertainer who came in wearing this, bright blue headdress and dress. And I really wanted to put her in the book, but you're balancing, the testimony versus all, the length of the book and all those things. So that's the first thing I did, is I just read everything. And then I went back and I read all the other clippings that were in the book to get a feel of what was going on there. Like, houses of prostitution were not called houses of prostitution. They were called disreputable houses. So, that's kind of where I started. And as I said, I was doing this from the perspective of the defense lawyer. And then all of a sudden, this kid, William Schumacher, said to me, who's reporting on this? And remember, it's the Depression. So not only do you have to play nice with the police if you want any stories, you have to play nice with the police if you want to eat, right?
Yeah.
If you're a reporter. And so the detective is a real guy. His name wasn't Ernie Blunt, but he was a real detective, and he was a famed Seattle detective from the Seattle Homicide Squad. And the prosecutor was a famed prosecutor. It was really a trial that the bigwigs wanted. They wanted to be a part of this story because it was that kind of that big. And then, you start reading the trial, and all of a sudden the defense says, yeah, we're going to bring in the police officers to testify about how they used to come in and gamble and how they used to come in and drink, and these are these were the beat cops. So, the other thing that kind of dawned on me as I was putting this all together is, Shu is in an interesting position for a lot of reasons, right? Well, what if his family is also struggling? His family is also struggling, and he's trying to help support that family. All right, that's a whole nother level of they really had him. And as you said, I think that naivete is there, along with that boyish belief that this is my story, this is my chance to break out and be somebody.
Well,
And I just fell in love with him.
poverty was, I think, somewhat rampant as well in that time period, as well as um, it's a beautiful backdrop, right? That time frame, the 20s, the 30s, it's somewhat of I think a beautiful backdrop to any story you're telling. But there is that often isn't given, I think, any coverage in entertainment pieces, whether it be books or movies. You don't often see that reality, that poverty was also a big issue in that time. And I thought you captured that. It wasn't just, the glamour of the clubs and the old school gangsters and the cool lingo, and the prohibition, it wasn't just that. You actually captured, that's what I thought made it so historically accurate. You captured that too, that poverty was an issue.
Yeah, it really was. And that's kind of a little bit of what the argument was with respect to The Boys in the Boat. The movie, people felt like it didn't tell enough about the struggles of the boys in that boat and what they had to go through and to get to school and to be in school. And they were, this far away from living in Hoovervilles. And, the one kid did live in Hooverville. And so everybody was trying to make a buck, which of course, when you have that situation, that's when politicians and police can take advantage of people. And that's sort of the situation you have going on here is everybody needs a nickel, a dime, whatever they can get. And you're right, it was an amazing backdrop for writing stories. And like I said, I really fell in love with it. I hope the book does really well. I'd love to do more with Shu and Howard
Oh
Fisher.
my goodness, yes.
It's such a, I say this, and I don't say this with any sense of patting myself on the back. It's just it's such a rich tapestry of characters, and a lot of that is because these people really existed back then. So
I concur. I mean, I think that stories that are based upon real people, are always the best because, they're filled with warts and all kind of stories, right? People are tend to not be perfect, right? They're not perfect people. So you get all these different character traits, and good and bad, right? Because more often the stories do lie in the gray.
Yeah,
Uh,
absolutely.
it's easy to go back and watch The Lone Ranger and see clear, good guy, bad guy. But most of the stories in the world lie somewhere in the middle, somewhere in the gray.
Yeah,
So I thought that was there too. They felt like real people to me. And I loved Shu. I mean, I'm reading it, envisioning his career, right? And I'm envisioning, what lies ahead for this character and seeing all these different stories, loving the concept of watching him grow,
yeah, yeah,
um, and 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 be a part of all these different things. And it's funny, this is going to sound like a weird thought to it for me to have had, but Agatha Christie, she had those two famous characters. She had different characters, that she used for her mysteries, but the Poirot and Inspector Poirot and the Miss Marples, I guess, were two huge characters for her. And there comes a point in time when she writes what she envisions to be their very last case for both of them, like how their story ends. And she does that very early on. Right there. They're early in the books, and she puts it in a drawer, and she continues to go on for, decades writing their stories, and always has the end, in her mind. And for some reason, I'm thinking that, like, I'm seeing this long, illustrious career for Shu, and like I'm in imagining, like, oh, would he do that? Would the author do that? Would he write like his last big story, 30 years down the road, put it in the drawer, and then keep going with? And I was even hoping that this will be a series as opposed to just a one-off book because, oh, how gorgeous I can see this being.
yeah. No, and I got Publishers Weekly gave me a very wonderful starred review where they basically said that there's plenty of room, that it's a noir, and there's plenty of room for James Cagney. And there's so many rich storylines. The thing about poverty, right, is that the people that have some money are wealthy because so many people have no money. So you had a lot of illegal gambling going on, and pull tabs were a big thing back then, and that's where the second storyline sort of comes in, right? Is you had all this cash coming in, people, and it was quarters and quarters and 50 cents and a dollar. It wasn't, but you started adding that up, and if you had $30,000 coming in, you were wealthy. I mean, you were very wealthy. So it's that there's that balance that was just, it was just amazing to me. um I hope that I'm lucky enough to be able to write many, many books, because it was also very refreshing for me not to have to worry about cell phones and computers and
Yeah.
all those things, right? I mean, every time you write a mystery now, somebody says, well, why don't they just look it up on their phone? Well, why didn't somebody call? You always have to think of that, how do you get around the phone, right? They have a phone, so how out of touch are they really? And it was just really wonderful to be able to write a book. And I've done it when I wrote a little bit of a historical in The World Played Chess, take people back to 1979 and the 80s and the Vietnam War and all that. And that was also very refreshing because we didn't have cell phones back then, not like we do now. So
You
there's
could be off the grid, right?
yeah, yeah, for a writer, it was a tremendous amount of fun to be able to do that.
Sure. I mean, yeah, you had to take us through literally when you wanted to know something. They got themselves there in person. They talked to people in person. There really weren't other methods of investigating. You hit the pavement to investigate. So I liked that a lot too. I agree with you. I liked removing technology to a certain extent, It's because it had that very old school vibe of putting a mystery together one piece at a time. Um, a lot less obvious, when you do it that way. So, I mean, I think that helped keep your interest. Besides Shu, did you have a favorite character?
Well, I loved Ernie Blunt. And I mean,
Yeah.
he's and that he was true to life. He was bigger than life, and nowadays, Seattle homicide detectives, they don't want anyone to even know. They don't want anyone to know them, right? They don't want anyone to know their name. They don't want the more anonymous they are, the better. But back then, he was sort of glamorous. He was the guy, the famed homicide detective, and he was probably a very bright guy, and um, so he was a wonderful character to write. I loved Howard Fishbaum. I don't know if you ever saw the Charlotte's Web, when the movie with the guy that plays the farmer, and that was my vision. It was such a clear vision of this guy. He was also the warden in the Green Mile. I don't know his name. He's a fabulous actor. I don't even know if he's still alive. But that was Howard Fishbaum to me. So, I mean, there were just so many of them. It was really a lot of fun.
Did you feel a certain obligation, uh, because these were real people? Did you feel a certain obligation telling this story to get it right?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I changed the names on some simply because, it's never my intent to embarrass a person or embarrass a relative, right? I didn't have to change the name of George Moore to George Miller. I mean, I didn't have to. He was, I just didn't have to do that. I won't say why. And there were other characters that Ernie Blunt, I could have kept his name, and stuff. But most important, I did want it to be factually accurate, and that's where the Seattle Library came into play. And I asked them if they had other articles on the time period, and did they have maps so I could see what downtown looked like and what stores were there. Did they have photographs? Because ironically, when I went into the library to look for books on that time period, there weren't a lot. And I think that's one of the reasons why The Boys in the Boat did so well. I mean, it's a classic coming of age story and overcoming tremendous odds, but it was also a book that took place during a time period where you didn't have a lot. There's not a lot of books on Seattle in the 1930s that I'm aware of. And so it was hard to get books and stuff that would tell me a lot of the history, and the library was really great about helping me with that. And then I found a biography that a guy wrote growing up. He was a shoeshine boy, growing up in Seattle during that time period and what it was like. So I wanted it to be as historically accurate as I could, but I also wanted the freedom as a writer to make the story even richer.
Sure. Well, I mean, yeah, the clearly, I mean, it's fictionalized. Certainly, Shu is a fictionalized character, and um, overall, I mean, it is historical fiction. You told your own spin on the story, but since they're based, the underlying crime, and a lot of the people in it are truly based upon people who lived and a crime that actually happened. I mean, I do think there's a certain burden to try to get that right. Right.
Yeah,
Anytime you're telling somebody else's story, I mean, I would think you're sensing, I want to at least get the essence of this story right.
yeah. And it's a story that's never been told, right? And
Even
just like
better, right?
right, just, The Boys in the Boat, or name some other the other one that Laura Hillebrand wrote about, the guy that was a prisoner of war.
Oh yeah.
There are so many rich stories out there that were never written because that was just life back then, right? There was life. There was a shooting in a nightclub, and there was a trial, and it's just life like today, right? But when you start to look at it more intimately, when you look at it from a human perspective, what did it do to the people that were involved in it? And how did that their involvement in that one tiny minuscule bit of history in the world in one little city, how did it really impact the city, and how did it impact them and the people in it? And it did become the trial of the century, and it was this big story because you had all these people that were enamored with, what is it like to have money? What is it like to be able to go to a nightclub? What are those nightclubs really like? Is it like watching Fred Astaire, in the movies with Ginger Rogers? Is it really like that? That's what was so rich about it, I think, was the wonder of the people that lived during that period of time. I mean, think about it. People would go downtown to go to the Pike Place Market, which now it's still a lot of fun, but it's pretty grungy. I mean, you're going into a market and it's raining and people are got their boots up, and they would go down dressed like they were going out to a nightclub. They'd have furs on and long white gloves, and men would be in suits with the derby hats just to go shopping for food. It
Yeah.
was just mind-boggling.
Now, you're an attorney, background wise, so I kept thinking when I was reading the courtroom scenes, was it fun to write
Oh,
or
yeah. Because I think you also have a legal background, do you not?
yeah,
Yeah.
I'm an attorney as well.
I mean, you can get away with any of that stuff they got away with back then. I mean, you would have been locked up and thrown out. I mean, and that was real. I wasn't making that up. That was real. I mean, the lawyers were actors on a stage, and that's how they considered themselves. And they were playing big. They were playing to the jury, and the judge was just another actor in the show. And now, boy, where do you stand? What can you say? What can you not say? I mean, I'm sure there are still actors out there with tremendous flair, but I remember reading a story about the guy in Montana, the cowboy, I forget his name now, who won all those cases and became very famous. And there was one trial where he had a cigar and he was smoking the cigar, and he had put a wire in the cigar so the ashes wouldn't fall off. So while the other guy's doing this cross examination, he's smoking the cigar, and all the jurors are watching to see when the ashes are going to fall, paying attention to it. That was real stuff, that people were doing
Yeah.
back then.
Yeah, and so I mean that was part of, for me, that was part of the pleasure of the story. That it didn't just, because in the beginning I wasn't sure, you're going through the investigation in the beginning, certainly the steps. You get to even see the death scene.
Yeah.
I don't want to give away too much. Just stop me if I'm blabbering into too much of the story on you. But you get to actually see, take you through the death scene and a lot of the investigation. And I'm thinking the whole book's going to be the investigation. Um, so I was pleasantly surprised when I wound up in the courtroom.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I thought that was a really exciting, nice turn. I also liked seeing the courtroom world meet that time period. As you say, it was so different in vibe, to what is a courtroom, even a courtroom scene, uh, dramatized by the entertainment world today.
Yeah.
It was just very different. So I
Well,
liked that.
and I looked at it as I was researching it and writing it, and now even going back and looking at the book, is it would make a fantastic play. Can you imagine going to a show and you open in the nightclub, and then you're in the police house, and there's not a lot of scenes that it would just I just think it would be one of those fantastic plays, that you go to see, and because that's what it felt like. When I go back to New York City, I'll dress up when we go out to the theater because it's just fun. It's fun to be able to do that, and to take in a show. And I felt like when I was writing the book, that I was almost taking in a show, and it was my responsibility to convey that to the reader, that you are part of the show. You're in the gallery, in the courtroom, and everybody's dressed like they're going out to a nightclub. They got jewelry and furs and all kinds of stuff on. They're not in shorts and a t-shirt watching this. This is a scene. It is a scene, that they are participating in.
Sure. I mean, what was it like outlining this? I'm curious Because there had to be a point in time when you deviated from, okay, these are the facts of the case. Now, how am I going to tell my version of the story? I think it's difficult when real life meets that fiction and you so don't want to tamper with this is what happened. I'm trying very hard to be true to capturing these people and these events. And now, how do I merge that with my fictionalized character, my fictionalized world? What was it like when you started bringing the fiction?
Well, what was really interesting was I took two true stories and blended them together. The stories with the pull tabs and all that stuff is also based on a true story, um, that I can't really talk about too much, but it's part of a history that I know personally. And so, I was always playing with the idea of what was important to people back then. What was important was money. Money was very important to people back then. And so, who doesn't like treasure, right? I'm thinking of the Count of Monte Cristo, which is the book Shu's reading. Everybody loves treasure and everybody wants to find it, right? Everybody wants to win the lottery. Everybody has this visions of it. So that was sort of what I took from this. And, I don't outline. I think we talked about this the last time I was on your show, is I'm not an outliner. And so for me, it's really just what would he do next? What is the next thing? And so what was my outline was the trial, right? I knew that the opening statements were on this day, and so testified on this day and this day and this day. Okay. But just like, you and I have been through, what happens when you're not in the courtroom then? You're not in the courtroom 24 hours. So what happens when you're not in the courtroom? What are you doing? So that's what I was asking myself, okay, so what is Shu doing when he's not in the courtroom? What is he investigating? What is he looking into? Who is he talking to? What would be the natural thing? It was natural for Howard Fishbaum to tell him, go out and talk to that prostitute. We want to get her story. What does she have to say about it? Joan Day, right? Real name was Joan Daly. Go talk to her, and so then you think to yourself, okay, here I have this 19-year-old completely naive young boy who's going in to talk to a woman of the night, who's very sophisticated, got this Hollywood movie star vibe to her, and loves to toy with him. What does that make him feel like? I mean, how does he deal with this? And he's struck between being sexually attracted to her and what would that be like, and oh my god, what am I going to do if I'm in the room with her and she comes on to me? He's just that dichotomy. So it's really a
He's
matter
in
of
way
what the
over his
character
head, right?
Yeah, he's in way over his head,
Yeah.
and she knows it.
What made you bring a little bit of romance?
um I thought that there would be a nice dichotomy for him, and I also thought it would be natural. He's a 19-year-old young man, and he's living in a city that he's never lived in. He's by himself. He's lonely. He goes to movies by himself and all those things, and he sees this beautiful Italian girl working in the bakery, and he just falls in love with her. Now, again, it's a naive love, right? Does he really love her, or is he just infatuated because she's so beautiful? So what's that going to be like? And then he's German, and I'm thinking to myself, this kind of just comes to me as I'm writing it. Okay, wait a minute, he's German, and what time period is it? And so I'm able to work that in and toy with that a little bit. And so I thought it would be natural for Shu. He's a young man, and what would be on a young man's mind? A young woman, somebody to kind of share his life with, to not be bored with, to have some fun.
Tell your story to.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, see, I thought that was a nice touch to the backdrop. It's by no means a romance novel, but I mean, I thought it was a nice backdrop to weave a little bit of romance into the story as well. That's why I said you can almost find anything you're looking for in this book. It's all there.
And it
Uh,
was a great opportunity to show more about the time period. I mean, the
Oh, yeah.
Garlic Gulch, that was real. That existed. That was an Italian area of Seattle. They had farms. They lived out on those farms. They grew grapes. They grew, they made wine. They grew vegetables. It was they had their own little community and they took care of each other and they were suspicious of outsiders. And you took the 10 baker to get down there to get to the thing, and that was all part of the of the period, the timepiece. I mean, if I just told the story of what took place in court, it could have been any time period, right? Almost. But getting him out into that world, putting Shu in that world, was a chance to tell the setting, Pike Place Market, the old courthouse, the downtown area, the restaurants, all that stuff. Going across to the Bon Marché and having a strawberry milkshake to share before you go to a movie. That's what my wife's grandmother used to do. And my wife's grandmother, when they were little kids, used to take them, to the Bon Marché so that they could have a grilled cheese sandwich and a chocolate milkshake. It's I think it was a very romantic time period, but it wasn't, right? It's just like people think the 1950s was this romance and blah, blah, blah. But you know what? People in the 1950s were doing the same thing that people are doing today. It just wasn't publicized like it was, back then. So we romanticize about other eras, and that's what makes it fun.
I agree with you. I agree with you. I think the world keeps turning with this very similar stories. Right? That's why Shakespeare is able to write Romeo and Juliet, and then, how many hundreds of years later, does a West Side Story come out? I mean, it's a retelling, a different setting, but there are certain truths that I think are universal.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
wrong people, not the wrong people, but sometimes people who shouldn't fall in love by outsider standards do.
Yeah.
And what does that mean? What will happen for you to try to be together against the odds, or against the pushing apart for whatever reason,
Yeah.
whether it's society or family pushing you apart? Will you make it or navigate through that? But there's so many truths that existed 300 years ago and exist today.
Yeah, I'm a romantic. I love that time. My favorite movie is Roman Holiday, with
Uh,
Gregory Peck and Sophia Loren,
yeah.
and it's that story, that timeless story of, can you fall in love with a princess and what's going to transpire? So I always loved it. And then I'm sitting there one night and I turn on the movie Notting Hill with Hugh Grant, and
Yeah.
all of a sudden I'm like, and what's her name? She's the famous
Julia
Hollywood
Roberts,
Julia Roberts, and I'm like, oh my God, this is Roman Holiday.
a
I mean,
retelling.
this is almost a blatant ripoff of Roman Holiday, but it's that universal truth of, can a famous person fall in love with an ordinary person, and what's that going to look like, and how's it all going to transpire?
Yes. And I think more often than not, people don't realize, and there's a tendency of thinking of different time periods as totally disconnected to now. Right? If you ever talk to a young person, that's why they think older people have nothing to offer them, right? Because no one could have possibly experienced what they're experiencing now.
Right.
Um, and I think all of us ultimately think, well, back then they didn't even go to the bathroom inside, indoors. Like, what, but that's not, technology may have evolved, science may have evolved, but 300, 400 years ago, people still loved their kids,
Yeah.
right? They still fell in love. They
Yeah.
still had to provide and go out and figure out how to put food in the bellies of their families.
Yeah.
Like, the people fell in love from star-crossed lovers existed, adultery existed. I mean, all these things existed. Um, uh, Way back then, the stories, weren't well known. Like you said, we tended I think the press tended to cover things a certain way, even with politicians, right? The unwritten rule that you never covered the infidelities of a politician.
Right.
100 years ago, press would never write about that. Whereas it's something now that they're looking for it, they're hoping
Yeah.
to catch it.
Yeah.
So yeah, we've evolved in the light that we shed on stories, but they're these universal truths. They've existed so long as humanity has
Yeah.
existed.
Yeah. And again, it comes down to money. A lot of people think that the change in the press with regard to what you're talking about happened with Princess Diana and the paparazzi. Um, Everything was sort of kept, you know, not quiet, but they just sort of, like you said, they left it alone. And then somebody realized there was money to be made here. If you got the right picture, the right snapshot, you're looking at $1 million. And so everybody with a camera suddenly became a photographer. And nobody, no small, minute portion of her life was private anymore. And that has transpired into politicians, like you said. They have no privacy anymore, none. And unfortunately, I think that's part of the reason why we don't have we don't have a lot of the same, we don't have as many good politicians, I think, as we've had in the past. I mean, people that were there for the right reasons, which was to serve your country. It's become a way to make money. And but I think you're right. All that stuff existed. It's just people respected other people's privacy. I always go back to the 1950s, right? Which is sort of the era my mom and dad grew up in, right? And you kind of believe that they didn't have sex back in the 1950s. I mean, they didn't do it, right? And suddenly you realize, they were in the back of cars at the drive-in theater. They did, but people just didn't talk about it. It wasn't something that you discussed.
Sure. I mean, nor did they capture it. And this is what's interesting for me, nor did they really capture it on film. A lot of the stories that are told now looking back, may capture some of that, but in the 50s, they weren't capturing it, right? I
Right.
mean, they wouldn't even show a married couple in bed together in the 50s,
Right.
right? They had said, and I think I Love Lucy, they had separate twin beds or something
Yeah.
in their
Dick Van Dyke Show. Yeah.
Dick Van Dyke's have twin beds. So even then, they were very meticulous about what they would show you,
Right.
which didn't really match reality so much. I mean, I think that is somewhat of a disservice. I know there are people who are going to disagree with me and say, well, no, because it was nicer then, you didn't see some of the stuff you see now. And but at the same time, it's somewhat of a disservice if you're trying to be genuine to the story.
Sure. I
You
think
know,
there's ways to do it now, and it's a way that I've sort of chosen for my own path in my books, which is, fade to black, right?
yeah.
Fade to black. People know, they know what happens. You bring them into their apartment, and they're affectionate with one another, and the next morning they wake up and they're in bed, or they wake up and they're having breakfast together. Fade to black. Let everybody. That's that white space that I think is so wonderful about books, is it allows readers to imagine. They can imagine what Shu looks like. They can imagine what Amara looks like. They can imagine that first night together after they get married. They can imagine all those things. I don't need to write them. People know.
Well, we were talking last time about, well, that's one of the things that is unique, I'll say, about your writing style. You do leave a little room for imagination, all right? You're not obsessed with the concept of describing every person down to how long their eyelashes are. You allow the reader to put a person in that in their head.
Right.
So, who is Shu to me? Is probably not what the Shu you envisioned or the Shu the next person envisioned, but you
Right.
don't force it on me, which I like. I really do. I mean, there are some writers who, this person's a redhead and they will beat you over the head with their red hair
Yeah.
throughout the novel. It'll become something, so I'm forced to in my own mind catalog that. I'm going, okay, who do I know that's got red hair that would fit this description? Like I'm almost forced to try to find that person to plug in to
Right.
envision the rest of my story. And I
Right.
don't care for that as much. I'd rather you describe the essence of the person to me. If you want to tell me she was very, very feminine or very Italian, and I rather figure out the rest myself. I like that about you. I like that in your writing
Well,
style.
thank you. Yeah, no, I appreciate it. It's kind of you to say. It is something that I chose to do, which is not interfere with someone's personal experience with the book.
Right. And again, I'm not putting any other author down. I get it. You know, some people like to they're telling you every thought they're having. They want you to see clearly who they saw,
Right. And they're good.
moving through it.
Hey, some people can be very good at it, and they can use a phrase to describe somebody, and you go, "Wow, that's really amazing." I don't think that's one of my strengths necessarily. I think my strength is in the storytelling and allowing people to just be in the story, allowing readers to be in the story.
Sure. And that this book definitely allows you to do that. Um, it's funny because when I first started reading it, I didn't know it was historical fiction. I didn't know, that I've read, many of your other books. This is very different than any book of yours in the past that I've read. So it took me only a few pages to go, wait a minute, right? Um, and I said it in the beginning, immersed. I felt immersed. I really liked that. I was right there back in the 30s, and I felt it all around me. I felt like I was walking through that time period, which I thought was great. And to your credit, you really helped suck me into the world. It's one of the things I love about books, that
Yeah.
I can sit down and get sucked into the world. And if I don't feel sucked into that world, I have a lesser experience with the book. Then it's not one of my favorites. It's not the ones that I enjoy. I make a valiant effort to finish every book that I start, but that's not in my, top 20 list, that's for sure. Like if I didn't get immersed. So I
Yeah.
really liked that. I felt so immersed in the book and so drawn to it.
No, thank you. Yeah, no, thank you. I hope readers do as well. That would be great.
Well, if you like historical fiction, all right, and you like a good old fashioned gangster story and a young reporter, which I loved that you did that as well. I like the feel of that Clark Kent, right? The Clark Kent, the Superman, the years ago you're running through a story as a reporter. I love reporters, and I thought that was a kind of a brilliant idea. Brilliant job.
Thank
I'm gushing a little bit, but I liked it a lot.
you. I appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you very much.
So will there be a sequel?
Yeah, my hope. I mean, a lot of times sequels are just decided by readers. How much did they love it, and how into it are they? Because I have the Tracy Crosswhite series, I have the
Yeah.
Kira Dugan series. The second book will be coming out in that series. Um, I had the Charles Jenkins series, and there are people that want me to write more about him, and um, so I would love. I've gotten contact with the library, and they sent me these links for websites about what was going on in the 30s and what stories were out there, and so I can sort of peruse them a little bit and find out, get some more information. But I would love there to be a second story. I mean, being a reporter is like being a lawyer. There's always another case, right? There's always another story. And so it's just finding the right story for Shu and Howard Fishbaum and everybody else. And then it's a matter of, do I start with, is he married now, or is he in the process of they're putting together the wedding plans? And do I have the families meet, and that kind of stuff. But I'd like to keep it in that era. I'd like to keep it in the 1930s, 40s, 1933, 34 kind of era. And so I don't want to rush. And that's what I've done with the Tracy Crosswhite series, is I'm not rushing to age her out. I'd like to do that with Shu. Okay, that maybe the next story takes place 2 months later, and they're in the middle of planning the wedding, and he gets a call from Ernie Blunt. Got another story for you if you're interested. And he's that kind of thing. Who knows? I mean, but I'd like to write a number of stories of Shu naivete, but he's starting to see the world as it is, and he's starting to play the game a little bit better.
Sure. I think Janet Ivanovich has been very successful with her Stephanie Plum series, doing exactly that, right? Not aging, not really aging Stephanie all that much. Like
Yeah.
she's kind of like in this 5 year zone that she stays in for the last 30 years.
Yeah.
So I agree with that. I think when you like a character, while aging is nice and probably a necessary evolution to feel authentic to the reader, I like the idea of also coming back to what is familiar. Not taking that person so far out of
Yeah.
the world where, it's 30 years later, I didn't get to see him get his experience or get, or start cutting his teeth.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah. So we'll see. Fingers crossed, right?
yeah, well, I wish you the very best success. I highly recommend the novel.
Thank
Um,
you.
Again, it was the first of this type for you. And I I mean it was a brilliant job. If you like historical fiction, you're gonna like this story
Can I
very much.
hold up a copy of the book? I think the cover is just gorgeous.
Absolutely, please
I mean,
do.
the cover designer just did a really brilliant job of capturing the time period and shoe a little bit. And if you open it up, there's Mount Rainier in the background, which is such an iconic. And up here they say the mountain's out, and that means it's clear and you can literally see the mountain, and it's just this massive thing. So I really thought that the design of the art designer just did a fabulous job, and he always does. And on all my books, he really does just do a great job. Yeah, really wonderful.
Well, the book is technically being released in
April 9th.
April 9th. So it's right around the corner. I think you can pre-order already.
Oh yeah, yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
so it's available. I'm sure it'll any place you can buy a book. And can't recommend it enough. I
Thank
thank
you.
you. Thank you so much for coming to join me. And again, I always say, please come back as you keep writing. I love
Absolutely.
reading your stuff and I love talking about it with you.
No, anytime. It's always a pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you for being here. Close the podcast out and say thank you for watching.